Good evening, and welcome again to Public Perspective. I'm your host, Kevin McDermott. And if you pay attention to the news, you know that election season is coming up. And when you vote that ballot, at the bottom of the ballot, the far end, are those listings of judges for retention. Most voters want to just skip past that, and tonight I have two judges on to tell you why you should not do that. So my guests tonight are Judge Pamela Loza and Judge Clayton J. Crane. Pamela Elizabeth Loza.
Thank you. It's great to be here. Thank you very much.
Thanks for inviting us.
Yes, my pleasure to have you here. So let's start with retention. We know that we go to the polling place and we see this long list of candidates, and you get through the first page, and then you go to the second page, and all of a sudden there's this long list of judges. And most people don't know what they're talking about, don't know what they're doing, and just skip it. So what is retention about? Well, first let's describe what is retention. When you're running for retention, what does that mean? Judge Loza?
Well, that means that every 6 years, once a judge is elected, a circuit judge of Cook County or in any other county, you have to run to be approved by the voters once every 6 years. You don't run as a political candidate, you run as a judge.
And you have no opponent, for example.
We have no opponents, that's correct.
And so, Judge Crane, you've been doing this now, and you have to run every 6 years and ask the people to say, am I doing a good job?
That's I've done it now 3 times, and it's vital, I think, to vote for retention, because judges have an effect on all sorts of aspects of your life. Judge Loza is involved in domestic relations, and she deals with most principally the children. I'm involved in the criminal division. I have a great effect upon the lives of many young people, unfortunately.
Now, I'm glad you bring that up, because most people think, well, I'm never going to go before a judge, I'm not going to break the law. But let's talk about the family division, for example. How do people end up in your courtroom? What happens to them?
Okay, very simple. We have 44 judges in our domestic relations division. Over 50% of marriages fail. So a lot of people get married. Tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people get married. So approximately 50% of you are going to appear in front of a judge. My office is down in the concourse level of the Daly Center. So I'm the supervising judge of the Parentage and Child Support Department of the Domestic Relations Division in the Circuit Court of Cook County. Last year we heard 67,000 cases.
All domestic related, right?
All parents having children without being married. So if you have a child out of wedlock, chances are you will be in front of one of our 7 or 8 judges.
And these are usually custody issues that are being
There are
debated?
child support and visitation and custody. So we see a lot of people on a daily basis, and you want experienced judiciary.
So if you find yourself in that position, what are you looking for from your judge? I mean, clearly to be even-handed, but what else would, if I found myself in a situation in front of you, I was getting divorced, or there was some issue with my children were in front of you, I don't have any, but if my theoretical children were in front of you, what would they want to see coming from you?
You know, our judges really care. I mean, we really take the time. We try and learn about the children and the people. We read psychiatric reports. We read psychological reports. We confer amongst one another. And our judges really take an interest in what is in the best interest of our children. I mean, we really we do. Mm-hmm. And we're concerned about them, and we try and find all sorts of resources that are available for the people. We have resource books, and we're constantly trying to update them and get new avenues and new approaches to try and streamline things, to try and get people sometimes the help that they need, get them. Sometimes people just want to know.
Now, it's interesting, and I'll come back to you in a moment, Judge Crane, but you mentioned the psychology and understanding what's going on in the family. So as a judge, you're trained as a lawyer primarily.
Correct.
So as the judge, though, particularly in domestic court, how much do you have to learn to be a psychologist or a social worker or any of these other areas that really touch family life?
Well, we're not experts in that, clearly, okay? And we do hire experts often. But, we take courses in those types of things. We appoint attorneys to be guardian ad litems or child representatives, attorneys for children. We hire social workers. We have the Marriage and Family Services. We have a whole department of social workers that help us with cases. We send the parties to mediation. So we do a lot of things where we're really concerned about children and the effects that, you know, not having both parents in the home has on those children.
So Judge Crane, you're in a completely different area of the law. You are in criminal courts. So you're not seeing so much domestic issues unless there's a crime committed.
Well, domestic violence cases.
Domestic violence, right? So we just heard Judge Loza talk about the kind of training, and certainly there's on the job, right? After you do enough family cases, you learn probably more about families than you ever thought you'd know, right?
That's true.
So what kind of experience and what kind of training, extra training, do you find yourself going through in the criminal division?
Well, in my normal court call, I deal with 380 cases. That's what's on my court call, and they run it from possession of drugs all the way up to murders. But there's a particular point that I get to each week on what's called the task mental health program, where I'm dealing with individuals who are committing crimes, normally property crimes. They're shoplifting to get the money to buy the drugs to self-medicate. They're attacking police officers who have come up to question them because that's the type of person I'm dealing with. And they all have a history of mental health difficulties, and they all have extensive criminal backgrounds. This particular program is an attempt by the county to end that, to avoid that recidivism with these people. We have an extreme, when they first come into the courtroom, they're analyzed by a great number of mental health experts from task and from the adult probation department, and we also have psychiatrists available for us to see what kind of program we can put these people in. And then they're on my probation, and I kind of have the hammer to keep them in the program, because they threaten.
If they don't, they go back
to jail. They go back to
right?
jail, and that's not what we're intending to do, but
Right.
that's the threat that we hold out to them. And the program has had marvelous results.
So, first of all, I'm intrigued about hearing that, because I like the idea that you know, the judicial system is not just there to punish people; it's really there to try to make them good citizens again, right?
You're trying to make sure whatever they've done, it doesn't happen again. Now, serious crimes, you send them to jail so it doesn't happen again.
Right, sometimes for a very long time, so that they can't. But what if you can talk a little bit about the task program that I'm not really familiar with? You know, how does it work, and why is it effective?
Well, it's effective because of the intensity with which we deal with these people. They have somebody looking over their shoulder at all times. There's a mentor from TASK, which is a program that puts together the treatment. There's a mentor from the adult probation department in their mental health department who's over their shoulder. They're on the phone all day with these people, making sure that they're going to whatever classes that are required. We control their housing. We control all their therapy. It is somebody looking over their shoulder. And the marvelous thing about the program is after you get in, it usually lasts about 2 years. In about the 18-month period, not all of them, but you'll see a marvelous change in many of them. And the first indication to me is family members start showing up in court to see how they're doing, because these people have burned every bridge imaginable.
Right.
Their families aren't talking to them. There's no contact. But that's the point when you know something good is happening and coming out of the program.
Now, it's interesting that it's essentially an intensive mental health program. What effect if we could get out ahead of the curve, and instead of waiting till they come up in front of a criminal court, if we could get them that kind of help to begin with?
It sure would be nice, but as we all watch, funding is a problem everywhere. And we have we scrounge around looking for the appropriate funding. That's the valuable part of TASK being in this program. They have connections to be able to do that. But unfortunately, at times, I'm holding people in jail until their housing becomes available, because if I put them on the streets, they're going to fall right back into what they're doing.
Right.
And that's an uncomfortable situation, but it works.
Now, Judge Loza, you obviously you're not in a position to be putting people in jail, but
Wrong.
oh, really?
Oh, yes,
So-
it's child support enforcement.
Ah,
So if you don't pay your child support and you have had the ability to pay, you will be committed to the Cook County Department of Corrections until such time as you purge yourself of that contempt, yes.
So you have the hammer as well.
I do.
How much how much mental illness do you see in your court as well? I mean, I think many problems can be traced back to mental illness. So
Well, I think I see a lot of dysfunction. We have, part of the things we have, because we're always trying, we have parental education, we have home studies done by the Office of Adoption and Child Advocacy. Our Marriage and Family Counseling Service does counseling for the parties to see if they can reach an agreement. We send people to therapy. We send children to therapy. We unfortunately have to sometimes deal with some horrid sex abuse issues, you know, juveniles acting out. So we see a broad range of people, a lot of dysfunction. It was interesting that we're trying to put together a program, and I won't bore you with the details, but we have 2 facilitators in our staff down in the basement, not in the basement, the concourse level, I should say, that are attorneys who are versed in, experts in mediation and also domestic violence, because we do see a lot of domestic violence. And
that can result in criminal charges as well.
oh,
right?
absolutely, but not with
not
me,
in your court,
not in
right.
my courtroom, but we see them. And so they told me the other day that 80% of the couples that they see are from single-family homes.
The couples who are having this kind of terrible trouble, they come from single
Right,
family.
and those are the ones that want to try and work out an agreement. So some people have no idea what it is to be in, to have 2 parents who are parenting at the same time. A lot of them that come from single-parent homes, and the non-custodial parent has, you know, disappeared, or they have a, you know, a TV idea sometimes of what, you know, that non-custodial parent is supposed to be.
And they have no real experience of an adult relationship that was
Correct.
formed
So
and
we
was
send them
working.
to educational classes and all sorts of things, yes.
So how much do we think that the troubles we see here are due to external factors? You know, this is the traditional liberal view is, right, that like nobody's responsible for anything because it can always be traced back to a grandparent who would be. Now, and I know I'm exaggerating on that. And then there's the other exaggeration, which would be, well, everyone's completely responsible and there are no extenuating circumstances, and you know, you pay the consequences. Clearly, there's some middle ground here. And Judge Crane, what do you think about the spectrum from, you know, responsibility for individual actions versus external influences?
Well, there are marvelous kids that come out of families that are dysfunctional, and then there's others that don't make it out of the family. Involved in my job, I'll have what's called a pre-sentence investigation, where they've gone through all the family background, medical background, education, and you'll see these young kids who committed very serious crimes, never knew who their dad was. Their mom might have been in trouble in the system also. And so it is extremely difficult for them to understand what the appropriate measures are, but they're still responsible for the acts that they do. I don't know how to solve that problem, but I do see what the results of it are in my courtroom.
And so coming back to dysfunction, I mean, the court seems like it's kind of the blunt instrument, right? When if there's criminal activity or if there's family dysfunction, it's like the last resort. You got here because nothing else worked.
That's true. That's true.
So as judges, I know you have little influence over the other areas where these people could find help, but if you were to be able to wave these magic wands, I mean, what other kinds of programs that the state might offer might help alleviate that? And Judge Crane, let's just start.
Well, there are at this point programs involved, and I'm able to deal with regular probation, drug probation, intensive probation, gang probation, Cook County boot camp, state boot camp, all of which are programs that are attempted to divert the person from the penitentiary sentence. That does nobody any good, except keeps him off the street and he doesn't commit a crime while he's in jail. And these programs are meant to kind of maneuver them into getting their GED, looking for a job, and getting the appropriate medical care. All the programs are geared that way, but sometimes they just don't work.
And we'd like them, we would like, I think, not to have to do that. The key is education. don't you think?
There's no joy in sending a young
I
kid to
mean,
jail.
Nobody,
I can
nobody
imagine
wants
it
to do
wouldn't
that.
be. Yeah.
You know, no, I don't think anybody wants to do that, but they really need the education, they need the skills, they need the vocational training.
And I will end up with very bright kids in front of me who are selling drugs. They're great salesmen. They could sell a car to you in 10 seconds. But they need to be redirected. And
Sure, because this is the role model they've seen. This is what works for them, and so they just learn this and follow it, right? But they're really good at it.
yes,
Right? So if you can get them to take those skills and apply them in something that's legal,
if you could get them to just stay in school,
Yeah.
God, that's so important. Once you see a kid in front of you that's missed 50, 60 days of school that year, you know you got a problem. You got to work to try and turn it around.
and you must see the same kinds of kids, right? Kids
I
who've missed
see
a lot.
many of the people that he sees, I see.
And
It's true.
You
It's
probably
true.
see them first, and then if it's not working, they end up with Judge
There
Crane.
are many, many cases where we're in the middle of the hearing and one of the parents is in jail. Okay? I mean, it happens all the time. The amount of violence that there is just scary. It is not uncommon for me to sit there and have an emergency come in that one of the parents has been killed. It's horrific.
How do you deal with that? I mean, how do you keep it from affecting you? Because you see, I mean, you're seeing the people in your court who are they're coming because of some dysfunction. And Judge Crane, you're seeing the people who are so dysfunctional, they've essentially flunked out of the system, and now they're in front of you on criminal charges. How do you guys keep your own perspective in those circumstances? Judge Loza, how do you do it?
Well, I think you have to take a lot of breaths, okay? I'm a certified yoga instructor. So
Literally, you take breaths, right?
I literally
Yeah,
take breaths. And I also teach yoga to my staff every Fridays from 12:30 to 1:30. Okay, we close off the courtroom and we have yoga. We do.
I love that.
But it's hard. I can't say that I have sometimes not gone home and cried because we care.
I did a case last week. I finally sentenced a guy who killed his own son.
Oh.
It was in the middle of a domestic argument with the mother, and it was horrible. It was horrible, but I don't do yoga. I pay the kid down the block to do the yoga for me.
To shine your shoes and do yoga on the
But
side, right?
you
Right.
immerse yourselves in other things other than your work to let that just simmer down, because those things are really tough.
Yeah.
I can imagine they would be, and I think psychiatrists and doctors who deal with dysfunction and illness, the same sort of thing. And so I would think you need some sort of outlet to try to do it. Now, I come back to something you said, Judge Loza, about how you get together with your fellow judges and talk. And Judge Crane, I don't know if you have the same routine there.
There's a magic room at 26th in California. It's called the Judge's Lunchroom.
I've heard about that place.
Yeah.
And that's where you expose to everyone all the difficulties you have or all your gripes or complaints. And you find out everybody else has got the same complaint and gripe too, and you work it out. The fellow judges are very, very helpful in that situation.
One of the things when you get on the bench, they tell you now belong to a fraternity, as it were, and that
Or
if you have a
sorority.
question, or sorority, and if you have a question, get off the bench and call another judge, and that judge will get off the bench and talk to you. And in fact, they do.
So in the middle of a case, you can say,
Absolutely. You can say,
recess,
excuse me,
go,"
recess, and go to someone if you have an urgent question. If not, you could ask someone. And we meet for lunch at least once a week. There's a bunch of us from the Domestic Relations Division. One of the other judges has called us the Delta Rho sorority. But we go to lunch and we talk about our cases and, and to get them out and to ask advice and to seek counsel, just like anyone else would.
so you have the magic lunchroom and you have the magic lunch day, right?
Lunch hour, at
Lunch
least.
hour? Yeah,
Lunch
right,
hour.
Right, one day a week. Well, and it's reassuring to hear that kind of level of collegiality, because certainly, I mean, the responsibility of a judge is, as you know, very significant, right? And we're humans. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to make bad judgments. I mean, you can't not do that. It's part of human nature. So having that fallback to talk with other judges must be invaluable. And Judge Crane, do you find that the new guys coming in, you mentor them after you?
Oh, sure. Because I remember myself when I first came in. And a quick story, there was a judge who had been on the bench for 32 years when I first came down to 26th Street. And I had a jury trial. I'd only been there like 3 or 4 months. I had a serious problem in the middle of the case, struggled to get to lunch, ran down to the lunchroom, and the judge was down there. And I explained the whole story to him. And he goes, "That's the damnedest thing I ever heard." But he talked it out with me.
Yeah.
I came up with the right solution, and it worked out fine.
That's great. I mentioned earlier I made a supposition, and I shouldn't, about making mistakes. And I think all humans make mistakes. But as judges, you can't afford to do that, right? So how do you make sure that you don't inadvertently do something that you're going to regret a few years later?
Well, I think that you see the facts, you think them over, you process them, you apply the law. I try and apply also common sense. I'm a very common sense type judge. I want to do something that's going to be practical, that's going to work, that's going to fit with the children's lives and the parents' lives. Have I made mistakes? I'm sure I have, okay? If I make a mistake right there and I notice it, I will change. Okay, and if I make a mistake or a rash decision, and sometimes I go, "I'm sorry, you're right, I'm wrong," and we'll go on from there. But it's something that you just take with you. When I was in private practice, I remember there was a judge, and he made a decision, and then he called me up 2 days later and said, "I was thinking about this, but I think I'm changing my decision."
Oh, even after the decision was made, he could reverse
okay.
it. Yeah.
I mean, yes.
Sure, they've got 30 days to file motions to reconsider, and every once in a while, you go, "You know what? You're right," and you reverse yourself. It is somewhat disarming to the attorneys when you do that, admit you're wrong.
Yeah.
But yet you work very, very hard to make sure what you're doing is the right thing, because it affects not only the person standing in front of you, but everybody they know.
And I'm glad to hear that, actually. I mean, not having spent much time in the judicial system, thankfully, that these kinds of reversals can happen, and that you have the opportunity to look back. And even if the attorney hadn't requested a reconsideration, I mean, you have the ability to, as you say, you go home and you think about it for a few days and think, "Wow, I rethought that." I mean, you have the ability to do that, right?
You do.
You do, and I think, and you do sometimes.
Have you found yourself?
I have. I have. Where I've been the one that forced the issue and said, "Bring that case back up," okay? I normally don't tell them what I'm going to do, but they have a good idea
Right.
when I say bring it back up.
That something's going to
gonna
change, or you
happen,
wouldn't
yeah.
have asked
Yeah.
before, right? So here's a question I ask all judges who come on the show, and it's about judicial philosophy. And by that I mean, outside of clearly enforcing the law, which you must do as judges, there's a lot of gray areas around the edges of laws. And is there kind of a philosophy, really it's actually kind of a philosophy of life, I think, more than a philosophy of law, but a philosophy of life that helps you interpret those gray areas? And if so, what would that be?
I have a lot of people who are pro se. By that I mean people who
defend
represent
themselves.
So I suppose one of my big things that I'm hung up on is due process, notice, and the opportunity to be heard. I always learned that in law school, and that was something I always stuck with. Okay, but I really want to have both parents there. Okay, and then I want to work out something, if I can, that's as practical for them, and that's as viable for them. So I'm all about that. If somebody says, "Well, I sent it to them and they're not here," or something, I always make them come back and show me proof that, in fact, and more often than not, next time I have both parties there. So that just seems to work out like that. But I'm really hung up on making sure that everybody has notice and everybody has the opportunity to be heard. And I make sure that, you have the opportunity to be heard, and you will have your time, okay? You don't have to interrupt the other person, but I will listen to what you have to say. I think that's really important, because lots of times people just they're not so upset with the decision sometimes in my courtroom, but they want to have their day in court. They want to be heard. They want to feel what they have to say is important.
And if you don't give them that, then the faith in the judicial system
Absolutely.
tends to be
Absolutely.
tends to diminish.
I concur. I always say I don't have the notice problem in my courtroom,
Right.
because most everybody's in jail already.
So they have to be
so
there.
they have to be there.
Right.
But I think that as a judge, patience is extremely, extremely important. The people that are in front of you, we do it every day. That's our job. We get in the car, drive to work, drive home, just like everybody else has a job. But they are in court once, twice, 3 times in their whole life. And it's new to them, it's strange to them, so you need to be extremely patient. That includes both the lawyers and their clients, and especially the pro se people, to let them talk and explain their position. They deserve that. That's why you're there. There's no reason to hurry through the situation. I do remember as a young lawyer getting hustled through a couple of cases by judges, and I don't want to do that. I really feel it's important that that everybody knows exactly what the story is. Everybody's been able to express themselves, and that when you give your ruling, they understand the ruling.
And I mean, there's always, especially in criminal cases, I'm sure there are appeals that happen fairly regularly.
It's pretty regular. I deal with very serious cases, so that most of them go up if they're found guilty.
But listening to your philosophy, I would assume then that that it's not because they don't feel they got a fair hearing in your courtroom. It's that's the natural process, that if someone is convicted of a serious crime, they're going to appeal it and see what they can do to try to
If you're sitting in jail and you're doing a lot of years in jail, you're going to write an appeal because that's going to help you pass the time.
Right. Well, yes, and who knows, it might actually work. It might lessen your sentence, so
it could.
So, yeah, so the person has nothing to lose by doing it other than the legal bills. But
well, normally there's no legal bills involved in that because they have no money, so the state pays for that appeal.
So even so, a criminal defendant who is convicted and goes to jail and does not have a lawyer, that the state will pay?
The State Appellate Defenders Program, which is paid by tax dollars, is the attorneys that represent them.
And how does that work? Does a criminal defendant then just say, well, I'd like to appeal my case, and so therefore it goes?
They'll file a notice of appeal.
Okay.
And at that time, they'll request that an attorney be appointed, make a quick determination of their ability to pay, and 99% of them don't have any money anyway, or otherwise they wouldn't be involved in crime.
Right.
You appoint the state appellate defender to represent them.
One of the reasons I like doing this show and having people like you on is I learn all this stuff that I never knew anything about before. So, do you have appeals? I mean,
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
What do they appeal?
They
Custody
appeal custody issues. One of the biggest problems we have is seeking permission to remove a minor child permanently when one person relocates to another state. That's very difficult because often both parents are very active in the child. If both parents are active in the child's life, how do you then separate that parent from the child? If, say, the custodial parent has to move, we have such a mobile society nowadays, and how do you balance the custodial parent going and seeking a higher position or getting married, or husbands now second husband is in the Army or the Air Force and gets stationed, as opposed to leaving the non-custodial parent in. How do you balance that, the loss of having that parent? So it's a constant weighing action, and it's a constant thing that it's probably one of the most difficult decisions that we have to make.
Well, believe it or not, we're out of time. So I'm glad that both of you are on the bench because really, it's very reassuring to talk to you and to hear the way you handle your courtrooms. I hope I never come before you, but if I did, I would feel comfortable. So I want to thank you for being on the show, and I want to encourage our voters to please vote the bottom of the ballot. Go to the retention judges, and you've been hearing from Judge Clayton J. Crane and from Pamela Elizabeth Loza. So please vote on November 4th. Until next time, I'm Kevin McDermott. You've been watching Public Perspective. You can see us every Saturday night at 8 on Comcast Channel 19, or find us on the web at publicperspective.tv. So until next time, thank you and good night.